She was just a temporary maid, making $14 an hour. He was the most ruthless syndicate boss on the eastern seaboard. When a sniper's laser painted his chest, she didn't scream. She clenched her fist and punched him right in the jaw. That single, reckless strike should have guaranteed her a shallow grave. Instead, it triggered a chain of events that would tear the criminal underworld apart and change her life forever. It was October 14th, the kind of biting autumn night where the wind off the Long Island Sound felt like ice against the skin. Nora Hayes, a 24-year-old employee for Pristine Elite Cleaners, was invisible. In the sprawling, 40-room waterfront mansion owned by the Conti logistics empire, invisibility was the goal. Nora wore a stiff black uniform with a white apron, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, scrubbing the marble baseboards of a dimly lit second-floor private study. Downstairs, a massive charity gala was in full swing. The muffled sounds of a string quartet and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes vibrated through the floorboards. But Nora wasn't thinking about the luxury below. She was thinking about the numbers strictly burning a hole in her mind. $142,000. That was the exact cost of the experimental cardiac surgery her younger sister, Lily, desperately needed at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Aris Sterling had given them 3 months to find the funds. Nora had $3 in her checking account. The door to the study clicked open, snapping Nora out of her panic. She froze, instinctively shrinking into the shadows of the heavy mahogany bookcases. The man who walked in was Alessio Conti. To the public, Alessio was a 32-year-old shipping magnate, a reclusive billionaire with old money and sharp suits. To the police and the terrified whispers of the criminal underworld, he was the head of the Conti crime family, a ruthless tactician who had taken over the syndicate after his father's violent death 3 years prior. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, predatory features and dark, calculating eyes. Tonight, he looked exhausted. He loosened his silk tie, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from a crystal decanter, and walked heavily toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark, rolling ocean. Nora held her breath, hoping he would leave so she could finish her shift. She gripped her cleaning rag tight. As Alessio stood by the glass, staring out into the pitch-black night, Nora saw it. It was faint at first, a tiny microscopic speck of bright crimson light dancing on the Persian rug. Then it crawled up the dark wood of the desk. Finally, the red dot came to rest squarely on the center of Alessio Conti's chest, right over his heart. Time seemed to fracture. Nora's brain fired on pure, raw instinct. She didn't know anything about the Mafia, about turf wars, or about the rival Russo family, who had put a $3 million bounty on Alessio's head. She just knew that a red dot meant a gun, and a gun meant death. If she screamed, he would turn, keeping his chest perfectly aligned with the window. There was no time for words. Nora abandoned her cleaning bucket, her rubber-soled shoes gripping the hardwood floor. She sprinted the 15 feet across the room like a track star. Alessio heard the sudden squeak of her shoes and began to turn, his brow furrowing in irritation. He didn't even get a word out. Nora leapt forward, planting her feet, and threw her entire body weight into a wild, desperate right hook. Her small fist collided with the side of Alessio's jaw with a sickening crack. The sheer force of the blow, combined with her momentum, sent the 200-pound Mafia boss completely off balance. Alessio crashed to the floor, pulling Nora down with him in a tangle of limbs. Less than a millisecond later, the thick, bulletproof glass of the window shattered with a deafening, explosive crack. A high-caliber sniper round tore through the exact physical space where Alessio's chest had been a breath ago. The bullet buried itself deep into the mahogany doorframe behind them, showering the room in splinters and pulverized drywall. For 3 seconds, there was absolute, ringing silence. Nora lay pinned against the rug, gasping for air, her knuckles throbbing with blinding pain. She looked down. Alessio Conti was beneath her, a thin trickle of blood sliding from the corner of his mouth where she had struck him. His dark eyes were wide, staring up at her in a mix of pure shock and deadly fury. Before Nora could scramble off him, the heavy oak doors of the study were kicked open. 4 men in tailored suits, Alessio's personal security detail, rushed in, their suppressed weapons drawn. "Boss!" The lead guard, a scarred enforcer named Matteo Rossi, roared. Matteo's eyes immediately fell on the broken window, the bullet hole, and then the maid pinning his boss to the floor. Misunderstanding the scene completely, Matteo lunged forward, grabbing Nora by the collar of her uniform and throwing her violently against the bookcase. A cold steel barrel was pressed directly against her forehead. "Wait!" Alessio barked, his voice ragged as he pushed himself up from the floor. He wiped the blood from his lip, his eyes locked onto Nora. "She hit you!" Matteo snarled, keeping his gun steady. "She's the distraction. The shooter is outside." "The shooter missed," Alessio said quietly, staring at the pulverized wood in the doorframe. He calculated the trajectory, then looked back at Nora, who was shaking uncontrollably, tears of sheer terror welling in her eyes. "Because she hit me." Matteo lowered the gun slightly, confused. "What?" "Lock down the estate. Blackout protocols. Find the sniper," Alessio commanded, his voice returning to its icy, authoritative bass line. Then he pointed a long, impeccably manicured finger at Nora. "Take her to the basement. Do not hurt her. But do not let her leave." "I was just cleaning," Nora cried out, panic seizing her chest. "I saw the laser. I just wanted to help." "Take her," Alessio repeated softly. As the guards dragged Nora out of the ruined study, she realized with terrifying clarity that saving the life of a monster didn't make you a hero. It made you a loose end. The basement of the Conti estate was not a torture chamber, but it certainly felt like one. It was a climate-controlled wine cellar, lined with thousands of vintage bottles worth more than Nora would make in a lifetime. She sat on a cold metal folding chair, her bruised right hand wrapped tightly in her apron. 2 hours had passed. No one had come. The silence was agonizing. Nora's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. She pictured her sister, Lily, lying in her hospital bed, waiting for a text message that would never arrive. If Nora disappeared tonight, Lily would have no one. The thought gave her a sudden, desperate surge of anger. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had saved his miserable life. The heavy steel door finally groaned open. Alessio Conti walked in, followed closely by Matteo Rossi. Alessio had changed his shirt. He was now wearing a dark turtleneck that made him look even more imposing. The right side of his jaw was visibly swollen, a dark purple bruise blooming along his cheekbone. Matteo tossed a thick manila folder onto the small tasting table in front of Nora. "Nora Hayes," Matteo began, his voice gravelly. 24. No criminal record. Mother died of cancer. Father walked out. You work 3 jobs. And you have a sister at New York Presbyterian needing a $250,000 heart surgery. Nora's blood ran cold. "How do you know all that?" "We own the security firm that handles the hospital's servers," Alessio said calmly, pulling out a chair and sitting directly across from her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, invading her space. "We know everything about you, Nora. What I don't know is why a terrified maid risked her own life to save mine." "I wasn't thinking," Nora said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I saw the light. I reacted. It's human nature to not want people to die in front of you. In my world, Alessio said softly, human nature is exactly the opposite. People pay very good money to watch me die. He tilted his head, studying her. Matteo thinks you were planted. He thinks you knew the shooter was coming, and you intervened at the last second to gain my trust. Nora scoffed, her anger momentarily overriding her fear. Are you insane? I hit you so hard I think I fractured my knuckles. If I was in on it, I would have just let the guy blow your head off. It would have been a lot less paperwork for me to clean up. Matteo stiffened, reaching for his jacket, but Alessio held up a hand, a dark chuckle escaping his throat. It was a rich, low sound that caught Nora off guard. She has a point, Matteo, Alessio murmured. He looked back at Nora, his gaze intensifying. The security feeds confirmed your story. The sniper was a mile out. The bullet was perfectly lined up. You moved me exactly 3 inches out of the trajectory. You saved my life. Nora let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 2 hours. So I can go? No, Alessio stated flatly. Nora's heart plummeted. Why not? Alessio stood up, pacing the small space between the wine racks. The sniper bypassed a $30 million perimeter defense system. They knew the exact layout of my study, the thickness of the glass, and the exact time I would be standing by that window. That means there is a leak in my house, Nora. A mole. He stopped and looked at her, his eyes dead serious. I have 50 guards, 3 chefs, 5 drivers and a dozen maids. Someone on my payroll sold me out to the Russo family. And until I find out who it is, I cannot trust a single soul who works for me. What does that have to do with me? You, Alessio said, stepping closer, are the only person in this house I know for an absolute fact is not trying to kill me, because you had the perfect chance and you ruined it. Nora stared at him, bewildered. Okay, so give me a medal and let me go home. I can't let you go home, Alessio replied, his tone shifting into something dangerously businesslike. Whoever orchestrated this hit knows you intervened. By tomorrow morning, the Russos will have your name. They will find out about your apartment. They will find out about your sister, Lily. You interfered in syndicate business, Nora. You are marked. The color drained from Nora's face. No, I'm just a cleaner. I have nothing to do with this. You do now, Matteo chimed in coldly. Alessio pulled a sleek silver pen from his pocket and a blank checkbook. I am a man who honors his debts. You gave me my life, Nora Hayes. I am going to give you your sister's. He quickly scrawled a number on the check and slid it across the table. Nora looked down. Her eyes widened so far they hurt. $250,000. That covers Lily's surgery, the VIP recovery suite, and round-the-clock private security at the hospital, Alessio said. Nora reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers hovering over the paper. It was everything. It was Lily's salvation. But she knew enough about the world to know that the devil never hands out free miracles. What's the catch? She whispered. The catch is that you work for me now, Alessio said, his eyes locking onto hers. Not as a maid, as my personal assistant, my confidant, my shadow. I need someone by my side who isn't corrupted by my world. You will taste my food. You will handle my personal schedules. You will sleep in the room adjacent to mine in my Manhattan penthouse. You want me to be your human shield? Nora gasped. I want you to be the one variable my enemies cannot account for, Alessio corrected. I will pay you $50,000 a week. You will have full access to my resources. In exchange, you belong to me until I find the traitor in my family and eliminate the threat. Do we have a deal? Nora looked at the bruised, terrifying Mafia boss, and then down at the check that meant life or death for her sister. She was stepping into a war zone, surrounded by murderers and liars. She picked up the pen. 50,000 a week, Nora said, her voice dropping to a serious, unwavering octave. And you cover my dental if your enemies knock my teeth out. Alessio Conti stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time that night, a genuine, dangerous smile spread across his face. Deal. The transition from a cramped, drafty apartment in Queens to a $40 million penthouse overlooking Central Park would have been a dream for anyone else. For Nora Hayes, it felt like stepping into a gilded, maximum security prison. Alessio's residence at the top of the towering Ethelgard building was a fortress of floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, brushed steel, and cold, monochromatic artwork. True to his word, Alessio had wired the first $50,000 into Nora's account before sunrise. By noon, her sister Lily had been transferred to the VIP cardiology wing at New York Presbyterian under the exclusive care of Dr. Gregory Bauer. Nora had her sister's life secured. Now, she had to ensure she didn't lose her own. Her new life was a bizarre mix of mundane administrative tasks and terrifying Mafia protocol. She traded her $14 polyester uniform for tailored Armani suits that Alessio's stylist procured for her. She managed his encrypted phones, screened his appointments, and, most bizarrely, sat beside him during private dinners, taking the first bite of his rigatoni or sip of his espresso to ensure it wasn't laced with arsenic. "You're glaring at the pasta," Alessio observed one evening, sitting across from her at the long mahogany dining table. It had been 2 weeks since the shooting. The deep purple bruise on his jaw had faded to a dull yellow, a constant reminder of their first encounter. "I'm just wondering if today is the day your enemies switch from snipers to cyanide," Nora muttered, taking a deliberate forkful. She chewed, swallowed, and waited 10 seconds. "Safe, though the garlic is a bit aggressive." Alessio let out a low, rumbling laugh. It was a sound Nora was becoming dangerously accustomed to. Beneath the ruthless exterior of the syndicate boss was a man who was exhaustingly hyper-vigilant, carrying the weight of a violent empire on his shoulders. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. Nora found herself, against all logic, feeling a flicker of empathy for the monster. "You've adapted remarkably well, Nora," Alessio said, pouring them both a glass of Barolo. "Matteo is still convinced you're a sleeper agent, but the rest of the men respect you. You don't flinch when they walk in armed. I grew up in foster care before my dad came back and dragged us into poverty," Nora replied, taking the wine. "I'm used to living with people who might snap at any moment. At least your men wear nicer suits." Alessio's smile faded into a look of quiet intensity. "I am close to finding the mole. I have my top enforcers interrogating the perimeter guards. Whoever shut down the infrared sensors on the south lawn will break soon." Nora frowned, swirling her wine. Over the last 2 weeks, she had applied the same meticulous attention to details she used as a cleaner to Alessio's world. Cleaners saw everything. They noticed what was thrown away, what was hidden, and what was out of place. "It wasn't a perimeter guard," Nora said quietly. Alessio stopped halfway through a sip of wine. He set the glass down. "Excuse me?" "I was looking through the staff manifests for the night of the gala," Nora explained, leaning forward. "My cleaning company, Pristine Elite, wasn't supposed to be there. We were called in 4 hours before the event because your usual internal staff was put on paid leave. A sudden pipe burst in the staff quarters, they said." Alessio's eyes narrowed. "That's correct. I authorized the leave." But who brought the plumbing report to your desk? Nora asked, her heart beating a little faster. Who suggested hiring a last-minute outside crew, a crew that wouldn't know the normal security protocols, a crew that would be easy to slip a disguised assassin into? Alessio's jaw clenched tightly. Nicholas. Nicholas Croft was the Conti family's chief financial officer. He was a silver-haired, grandfatherly figure who had been Alessio's father's right-hand man for 30 years. He had practically raised Alessio. Nicholas handles the money, not the security, Alessio dismissed, though his voice lacked its usual ironclad certainty. He handles the money, which means he signs the checks for the security software. Nora pressed. She stood up, walking to the console table and grabbing a tablet. She pulled up a spreadsheet she had been cross-referencing. I looked at the server logs you had Matteo pull. The South Lawn sensors weren't hacked from the outside. They were put into maintenance mode, using a Level 1 administrative passcode. Only 3 people have that passcode. You, Matteo, and Nicholas Croft. Alessio stared at the glowing screen. The betrayal was a physical blow, heavy and suffocating in the quiet room. Nicholas has been with my family since before I was born. Why would he sell me to Dominic Russo? Because you're modernizing, Nora said softly, echoing the grumblings she had overheard from the older capos. You're moving the family into legitimate shipping and tech logistics. You're stopping the narcotics trade. Nicholas is old school. He's losing millions in under-the-table kickbacks because you're cleaning up the syndicate. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Alessio looked at Nora, truly looking at her, not as a human shield, not as a maid, but as an equal. The variable had just solved the equation. "Get Matteo," Alessio finally commanded, his voice deadly and cold. "We are taking a trip to the Brooklyn Navy Yard." The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt of the abandoned Brooklyn Navy Yard into a slick, black mirror. Alessio's armored SUV pulled into Warehouse 4, a cavernous, rusting structure that smelled of salt, motor oil, and decay. Nora sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling. Alessio had told her to stay at the penthouse, but she had refused. "If Nicholas knows I'm on to him, I'm not safe anywhere without you," she had argued. Alessio had reluctantly agreed, tossing her a Kevlar vest before they left. Matteo and 4 heavily armed guards fanned out as Alessio stepped out of the vehicle. Nora stayed close behind him, her eyes darting across the shadows. In the center of the warehouse, illuminated by the harsh glare of a single overhead halogen lamp, stood Nicholas Croft. He wasn't alone. Surrounding him were a dozen men holding assault rifles, wearing the distinct black tactical gear of the Russo family. Standing next to Nicholas was Dominic Russo himself, a scarred, brutal man who smiled like a shark. "You always were too smart for your own good, Alessio," Nicholas called out, his voice echoing in the massive space. He didn't look like a grandfather anymore. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Alessio didn't draw his weapon. He stood tall, the absolute picture of terrifying calm. "You broke the oath, Nicholas. For what? Russo's blood money? For the survival of our way of life," Nicholas spat back, stepping forward. "You're turning us into accountants, Alessio. The Contis used to rule this city with fear. Now you sit in boardrooms. Dominic offered me $50 million and control of the East River ports to leave the back door open." Nicholas sneered, his eyes landing on Nora. "I just didn't expect a little scrub brush to get in the way of the sniper." "Kill them," Dominic Russo ordered lazily. "Leave the girl for me. I want to see the maid who punches billionaires." The Russo men raised their weapons. Matteo and Alessio's guards did the same. It was a standoff that Alessio was mathematically guaranteed to lose. They were outgunned 3-1. But Nora wasn't looking at the guns. Her eyes were tracking the thick, heavy industrial power cables running along the rusted steel girders above them. She recognized this type of warehouse. She had cleaned industrial sites just like this in Red Hook. The main breaker boxes in these pre-war shipyards were always located on the loading docks. She was standing right next to the rusted metal control panel. "Alessio," Nora whispered, barely moving her lips. He didn't look at her, but she saw his shoulders tense, acknowledging her. "Drop to the floor on 3, she breathed. "1," Nicholas said, raising his own pistol. "2," Nora whispered. "3." Nora didn't drop. She slammed her palm against the massive red emergency shut-off lever on the control panel. Clack! Instantly, the entire warehouse was plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The halogen lamp died. Chaos erupted. The sudden blindness panicked the Russo men. A gunshot echoed, blindingly bright in the dark, followed by shouting. "Down!" Alessio roared, grabbing Nora by the waist and tackling her behind a stack of steel shipping crates, just as a hail of bullets tore through the space where they had been standing. Deafening gunfire filled the warehouse. Matteo and the Conti guards, trained for tactical blackouts, had night vision optics in their tactical vests. They systematically began taking down the blind, panicking Russo men. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse in strobe-like bursts of violence. Nora huddled against the cold steel crate, her hands over her ears. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her ankle. She screamed, kicking out wildly. In the flash of a gunshot, she saw Nicholas Croft's face. He had crawled around the crates, a desperate, feral look in his eyes, pointing his gun directly at her chest. "You ruined everything!" Nicholas screamed. Before he could pull the trigger, a massive silhouette emerged from the dark. Alessio slammed his boot down on Nicholas's wrist. The bone snapped with a sickening crunch. Nicholas howled, dropping the gun. Alessio grabbed his former mentor by the collar, hauling him up. In the dim moonlight filtering through the broken skylights, Alessio's face was utterly devoid of mercy. "You don't touch what is mine," Alessio hissed, his voice a lethal promise. He raised his weapon. 2 suppressed shots fired. Nicholas dropped to the ground, motionless. The gunfire in the warehouse slowly ceased. Flashlights clicked on. Matteo stood over Dominic Russo, who was bleeding out from a chest wound. The ambush was broken. The treason was purged. Alessio dropped his gun and fell to his knees beside Nora. He grabbed her shoulders, his hand shaking slightly, the first time she had ever seen him lose his absolute composure. "Are you hit?" "Nora, look at me." "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes wide as his hands rapidly checked her for blood. "I'm okay," Nora gasped, her adrenaline crashing. "I'm okay, I think I need to sit down." Alessio didn't let her sit on the dirty floor. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, grounding himself in the fact that she was alive. "You're not a maid, Nora," Alessio whispered fiercely against her temple. "You're a queen. My queen. And no one will ever put you in the crosshairs again." 6 months later, the sun shone brightly over the private gardens of the Conti estate in Long Island. Nora sat on a marble bench, watching her sister, Lily, run across the grass, her cheeks flushed with the healthy, vibrant color of a fully healed heart. The surgery had been a complete success. Nora wasn't wearing a maid's uniform, nor was she wearing the stiff corporate suits of an assistant. She wore a flowing silk sundress, a massive, flawless diamond resting heavy on her left ring finger. Alessio walked out onto the terrace, holding 2 cups of coffee. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. The empire was secure, running legitimately and smoothly without the old guard's poison. He handed her a cup and sat beside her, wrapping a strong arm around her waist. "Matteo says the perimeter is secure," Alessio murmured, kissing her cheek. Nora smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. Good. But if anything gets through, you know I have a mean right hook. Alessio chuckled, his eyes filled with a warmth that only she was allowed to see. I know, mia cara. I'm banking on it. She had punched a Mafia boss to save his life, but in the end, it was her heart that had captured his. What a wild ride. From a $14 per hour maid to the undisputed queen of the underworld, Nora proved that sometimes the biggest risks yield the most incredible rewards. Did you expect Nicholas to be the traitor? Let me know your favorite plot twist in the comments below. If you loved this Mafia romance drama, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more gripping stories.